scheduled to be a fireside chat.
Yeah.
But since we're such a family atmosphere, I think it's better if everyone just asks questions. So maybe I can kick it off with one. So 75 investments, 20 successful exits, 20 failures, 30 of them still alive. Have you found any patterns in identifying the right teams besides the generic that they have to be coachable or that they need to be driven? Or how do you understand if they're coachable and driven? So any insight in that or any patterns you found that work over time?
Yeah. So first of all, I want the team to have known each other and probably worked together rather than socially for some time before that. So I need them to have built up a trust bond between the two of them or three of them beforehand. And which is why there are basically two sorts of accelerator. There's talent-led and team-led. The team-led come in as a team, stick together on the accelerator and pop out the other end, having known each other, not just for those 3 months, but probably 3, 6, 9 months, 5 years before that. Whereas talent-led, they come in and then the accelerator builds teams from that, and they can't have known each other more than 12 or 13 weeks before they try to move on. So in the end, it's to do with the bonding of the entrepreneurs and the trust they built up. So how do you work that out? You work that out by the due diligence process, by talking to them and understanding them and see how they interrelate to each other. And so that's the most important thing to start with, is to ensure that they will cohese as a team. Now, as I think I've got it on a slide later, I've backed 76 investments, about 150 founders, about 30 to 35 have left, founders left at some point, or more than one founder. That is really tough. That's emotionally tough, it's logistically tough, trying to either eject them or them just walking away.
But pre-investment, you only get to meet them like 1, 2, 3 times, right?
No, disagree. No.
You have time to talk with them and meet with them more than that pre-investment.
The deal lead, and this is a process that I've stuck with for many years, will spend a lot more time than that with them. Okay. Other investors won't, of course. You can't waste too much time because there's a compromise between you meet them, you want to get the cash into them as soon as possible so they can start growing the business. You don't want to waste their time talking to you, do you? Because they're already working on the business. They're talking to potential customers, they're coding and everything else. So you want to get that as short as possible, but at the same time, you want to be as long as possible so you can get to know them. But you certainly don't want multiple angels all to take time with them unless they're in the same room. That's not quite so bad. So we allocate 1 or possibly 2 angels who are deal leading, who will spend the time doing the due diligence, negotiating, etc. And then the other angels will follow those because they trust them to be good deal leads. So they're the ones, and varies obviously, but I can't see it being less than 20 hours, maybe even 30 hours I will have spent with some entrepreneurs before I make the final decision, and then draw the people behind me to write the checks as well.
Got it, great.
So very different.
Maybe we can take the next question from the audience. Does someone want to ask a question?
If we follow up on this, Peter.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't know if it's easy for you. 20, 30 hours, if you can give us a little bit a roadmap, how you start, what you are doing, and of course, whatever you can share with us, of course.
Yeah, pretty much what you'd expect. The document you're starting with is the plan, and the plan might, in the old days, it used to be 75 pages of dense text. That's long gone. Nowadays, it's 15 slides. So, plus a spreadsheet associated with it, which is the finances, which has got all the assumptions on it, because the assumptions drive the spreadsheet, of course. It's going through that, exploring that, making sure that they've understood it, they understand their market, well, not just in the market, they understand the technology, they understand the assumptions, and just talking that through, and at the same time, seeing if they're coachable, seeing if they'll listen to you, seeing if you explain. I mean, a big example, and I wouldn't dream of investing anybody who worked out top-down numbers when they were doing financial forecasts. You've got an app that can go on a mobile phone. What they'll say is, there are 5 billion mobile phones out there. We can hit
just 1% of that.
Exactly. Just 0.1% of that is 50 million phones. We charge, $2 for each phone. We make $100 million a month. This sort of thing. So just exploring like that and just working. But at the same time, you're beginning to understand how the dynamics are between them, and so how they're listening. And then at the same time, although not in front of them, you're doing some digging around in the background. You're digging around on the internet to find out what their background is. If they've had an entrepreneurial journey in the UK, there's a lot of transparency about them being directors of companies, etc. You can work that out. You can take references from other entrepreneurs. So you're doing the due diligence and you're spending time in front of them. I mean, you wouldn't need to be doing 30 hours always, but I cannot believe you can do it in less than 10 hours. And you go out for a pizza with them or a beer, you get to understand them as human beings. You know, what drives them, you know, whether it's money that's driving them, which is rare nowadays. It's usually change, independence, disruption. But of course, you do want a level of financial drive because you're putting some money in that you want them to increase in value.
Sometimes when you see two founders, let's say, and one has more expertise than the other, and usually they go 50-50. Do you think, did you ever discuss about this? Because this is another thing, when they come to founders, say, hey, we started 50-50, and then we see, because I use Alex on this, and I see their background, and then of course I make them higher and less, and then I challenge them, okay, why you should have 60, you know, how you can do 50-50, and do you think this is also, do you help them by that or no?
I think the other way around, actually. I'd rather they had 50-50. If the trust bond is strong, they've worked together, I think it's almost wrong, even if the skill set's different. Chances are one is more charismatic in the ability to stand on stage, more as a salesperson, then the other one probably is the more technical one. So you know, if they're not 50-50, that's when I start to think about it. And I've got a great example of a French entrepreneur and a British entrepreneur who span out of the Cambridge University with a special type of, I mentioned it last night, the battery technology. It's a nanomaterial on the anode of a battery, small battery, not vehicles. And I think they were 60-40 or 70-30, plus some academic had a bit of shares as well. And that actually, after 6 years, has gone wrong. And so we've had to organize a situation where the French person who's got the more shares is actually giving some shares to the other one because there was a level of resentment building up because although the French guy is definitely the CEO and the outgoing person, the other person's technical input has been even stronger than they expected to start with. So no, correcting after the 50-50s.
If someone is the second time, you know, entrepreneur and third time, you think it's okay?
Well, if that's the case, then chances are they're probably not 50-50 to start with. The issue is much worse when you've got a single founder who's got a great idea and is trying to find a co-founder. How do they divide the company then? And you can end up with some really badly organized cap tables where it's 90-10. I have a rule myself that nobody should call themselves a founder unless they've got at least 10% of the shares on day one.
Have you ever done matchmaking, bringing two people together to form a company?
I've never needed to. I've been, they've already come to me like that. I've certainly done matchmaking in terms of attaching somebody else as an early employee, but not to the founding team.
So since you mentioned the example, the Cambridge example, can you elaborate a little bit on the advantages and disadvantages of investing in university spin-offs as compared to a traditional, startup that's not come out of university?
Yeah, as I said last night, actually, of my 20 university spin-outs, they've actually done better than the rest.
Okay.
They've lasted longer, they've had more exits, etc. Now, part of the reason they've lasted longer is because Cambridge, which most of them have come from, has got a huge amount of capital hanging around it, just investing in the university startups. So we always expect university spin-outs to take longer because they've got something that's pretty deep tech and the market could be a long way away. So we expect to have put more money and there's people putting more money in. So they have survived longer.
And you have grants and stuff like that.
You have grants which are usually in the
Yeah.
university, but the tech is still coming into the company because the professor's probably got a share, has probably got a half-day-a-week role. So no, they've actually done better.
Are professors a pro or a con in the...
We went into this at length yesterday with a number of professors in the room and assistant professors. My view, and a lot of experience here, is the professor is definitely a pro, providing they aren't running the business. That they stay in academia and that they provide the connections to grants, the connections to the laboratory that they need to use, etc., in the early stage before they got their own equipment, and that they have a percentage on the cap table. It could be 2%, it's probably a bit low. It's unlikely to be more than 20%, it's some number there. So they are actually motivated by increase in enterprise value, not by other things.
Yeah.
And so I gave an example yesterday where a professor wanted to be the CEO. I led the round and initially had 14 people who wanted to invest and ended up with 4 because they all wanted that professor not to be the CEO.
Yeah.
In fact, the 4 that we invested with a VC, we invested 50% straight away, and the other 50% was only when there was a VP of sales employed who looked like he or she could become a CEO. And that's exactly what happened. So 50% in, VP of sales, the other 50% in, professor steps aside, VP sales becomes CEO, exit to a quoted Austrian company.
Awesome. Sure, go ahead.
Could you elaborate a bit on the notion of bankroll management? For example, if you have 100K to invest, like how much would you use as an angel investor and how much would you use in more, let's say, traditional forms of investments? And if you also could talk about, do you see angel investing as a profession or something on the side?
Well, the answer to the end is both, of course. I take it as a profession, and whether professional is the right term. It has been a source of income, but it wasn't guaranteed that, was it? So I had to have another source of income in order to do it. So in the UK, they say there are about 250,000 investors in early stage, but at least 200,000 of those are crowdfunding, so we ignore those. And if you take the top 5,000, I'm probably in one of the top 100 or so. This isn't by financial return, this is by how active we are. So within the Cambridge Angels, there's 60 of us, and a few people, one person's got is CEO of a quoted gaming company, for instance, so obviously they haven't got much time to do it. That all varies, whether you're on the side or not. The 100K slightly worries me. What do you mean by that?
You have 100K that you're not afraid to lose.
Okay.
Invest.
Okay.
How much would you invest all of them as an angel investor? Would you put some in the stock market or?
If you saw the figure earlier on, I said 10 to 15% of what you have to invest. So,
I saw that.
yeah. And so in your
Of all
case,
your assets, not only what you have to invest. That includes invested in property, for example.
yeah, do you mean 100K and then you've got
Just
property
sitting
and
around in the
pension?
bank. You have 100K sitting in the bank, you don't need it. How much of that do you put into angel investment, and how much in stocks, and how much in bonds, and how much in other?
I go back to what I said before. I think you shouldn't put more than 10 or 15% in this asset class.
And that includes the follow-on rounds.
Exactly.
Okay.
Which is why I said here in Greece, you really shouldn't think of becoming an angel investor with less than 100K. In the UK, we say 300K pounds, a bit more than the euros. And this is because if you're going to build a portfolio of, say, 20 companies, and you're going to put 15,000 pounds, I'm doing it in pounds now, so 3 times 5,000 pounds is 15,000, times 20 is 300,000. You've got to have that breadth of portfolio. Of course, you could do this with 1,000 euros or pounds in each one, and then you get to 60,000, but that's still a lot more than the 10 or 15,000 that you're talking about. So I don't think you should seriously take angel investing as any form of asset class if you've only got 10 or 15,000 that you should be doing. And now if you're willing to put your whole 100,000 in, which I'm not sure you should.
All your 100,000?
Yeah, I did. I put far too much money.
You invested solely as an angel investor?
No, of course I had property. I had 5 houses at one point, and I've got other things. So, but I still invested probably half my wealth in angel investing. But then as you saw the figures, I've effectively multiplied my total wealth by at least 2, if not more, already, and it's coming more. But you shouldn't follow my example. I've taken far too much risk in this.
And survival bias is a big bias.
Yes.
Since we mentioned follow-on investments, you mentioned that you should definitely keep like 3 times the amount you invested
2 to 3
for follow-on
yeah.
investments. So here's a question. Usually, the follow-on rounds are in much higher valuations. So doesn't the amount that you will, the equity that you will end up getting from the following investments, isn't it too small to make a difference?
I've often had this conversation. If you have a class of share that hasn't a preference, or even has a preference, where you're buying in and the share price is going up and up and up. So you're buying in at €1, got around at €2, around at 5 years, and it exits at €10. What you're making money on is each share that's gone up in value, not on the percentage of the company you've got. The reason to have a percentage is because it gives you special rights. So in the UK, for instance, if you've got 10% individually or as a group, you get the right for board representation, 5% right for board observership. And you've also got the rights to start to block things like a sale at the wrong price and so on like that. So the only reason you would want to keep the percentage up is that if you really, really, really believe in the business and then you're backing what you call your winners. I totally agree then. Then you're going to have to put larger and larger sums in to keep that 0.3% or that 1.1%, but you're not going to have 20%, are you? You've still got a fraction of the company. So backing your winners, I agree with that. But in principle, if you're using the numbers game, the fact that the share price has gone up is enough. You've got a 10x on that first share if it sells for €10. It's not relevant what percentage of the company, every share there has gone up by 10 times. That's my view.
So just reinforcing a winning horse by continuing to invest in something that you see that's going well.
Exactly, do that. In other words, back your winners and don't back the ones you don't go into. That's a different matter altogether. You don't need to do that by retaining a particular percentage, of course. Remember that if it's a good winning horse, it's difficult potentially to invest anyway because you have preemption rights only for that proportion of the company you've already got. The pro rata. Obviously, the founders won't invest, so it's slightly bigger. Of course, you would probably have more room there if some of the investors don't invest. That gives a bit more room. But the chances are, as you get later stage, you've got the VCs coming in here, and they will take up any slack. So you might only have the ability to invest your pro rata.
Great. Next question. Okay, I have one. Andreas, yeah, sure.
If I understood correctly, you are not so eager in patents that a startup would go for, or phones in the hand. There I really have a different opinion and a question. Why don't you think it's important? I put a lot of emphasis on that, maybe on the
There are two elements to this. One is on acquisition, the patents could be very important. I mean, if you take the Apple exit I had, it was team and it was patented IP that they bought. And those patents were probably worth $10 million or something like that. So on exit, a patent is worthwhile. As you're building the business, I really don't think it's worthwhile because if you have a patent and it's challenged, it's going to cost you a huge amount of money to defend it. Huge amounts of money. We talk of a minimum of £250,000 minimum and possibly £5 million to defend a patent. And when you're defending a patent, you're generally defending it against a much bigger company, which has got many more resources. So you can use it, of course, as a bargaining point and then do some sort of cross-licensing deal of some sort. But actually owning a patent, there's no point in having a patent unless you can defend it, is there really? You know, and the cost of defense is so high. So that's on the one side. And the other side is patents can be of strong value to an acquirer. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, but you should have them on the understanding that if you have to defend them, it could make you go bankrupt. So you'll end up having to do something with that. And just one other slight anecdote. I'm on the board still until the end of December and have been for 12 years of a company that produces a system for putting fires out using high pressure mist. And we started, it was the consumer, most house fires start in the kitchen, burning oil or whatever. So we built the product around the tap. So the tap comes out, a little thing below the tap, and so basically we pump the water from below, which is down there, only just normal water, high pressure, comes out at 100 atmospheres, and it puts out the fire. Like a sprinkler, but uses 10 times less water. And we patented this, and it cost us, over the years, perhaps €200,000. we don't use it any longer. It's of no relevance to any longer. So we've redesigned it so it actually sits on the wall, and when it heat detector detects there's a fire, it comes out and it has a look around the room, and when it sees that you're on fire, it'll fire at you like a fire extinguisher. That's patented, and that's worthwhile because, you know, when we exit, it'll be important. But the first patent was useless, complete waste of equity.
You've been investing for more than 20 years, as I understand. How have you seen yourself or the way you invest change over the years? You tend to become more risk averse, more risk taking, or what you focus on? What changed over the years?
Yeah, all kinds of things over the time. It was about 15 years, not 20 years. I certainly developed the set of rules you saw, and I stick with them, and that took me about 3 or 4 years. But after that, I really haven't changed much at all. I honed my ability to do due diligence on the entrepreneurs, so that gradually got better. I got better connected, so I could help them more. One thing that actually I haven't pointed out, which might get pointed out later on, and it took me a bit longer, I realized after about 5 or 6 years that and I think it's mentioned later, I should write off the investment as soon as I make it. And, you know, that's why I'm positive about an exit of 300 euros. We were talking about this before. You know, once you've written a check, and I haven't put much into this, about 5,000 euros. So I'm put 5,000 in, getting 300 out. The 5,000 in, which I put in about 10 years ago, is gone. There's nothing I can do with it. Don't get emotionally connected to it. Help them out, definitely, you know, because the entrepreneur, if you've got the time and you feel like it, the entrepreneurs are going to go through a really rough time. If it fails, help them out, do it. But if there's anything coming back that's not even, you know, what you put in, that's good news. Try and work that out. That's a really difficult one. Think about that. Once it's gone in, you've got a share certificate, which is a piece of paper, which is of no use at all until there's a liquidity event. So that, again, that's a psychological thing that I learned. You can't easily do that unless you've got a number of investments, of course. If you've only got 2 investments, it's difficult to emotionally disconnect yourself from those. So,
Peter, a quick question to the audience. How many of you know what an SPV is? Raise your hands if you know what an SPV is. Okay, for those that don't, tell us what an SPV is, and if you think it's always needed in angel investing, if it's not always needed, in which cases is it?
An SPV is a special purpose vehicle. It's an entity, a legal entity that's set up so that the investors put the money into the SPV and the SPV puts the money into the company. That has great advantages for the company because you've only got one entity on the on the shareholder register, so they've only got to communicate with the SPV, whoever's running the SPV. The SPV also has more rights because they're representing a bigger percentage of the company. The downside is that the SPV costs somebody some money and time to run. So the States, it's done the whole time. Everybody uses SPV. You can also, from the SPV, set up a legal agreement so that the deal lead, which might have been you, can take a profit share out of it. So that basically you're taking a profit share out of the other investors in the SPV. That has to be agreed between you. You can't take any money out of it. Once the money's gone in, you can't take a fee out of it, but you can take a risk-based carry. So there are lots of good reasons. We have something called a nominee structure in the UK, which is similar. It's an SPV, but it's not actually a limited company or something, so the costs of running it are much less. We don't do that in the UK, though. We don't do that because our tax reliefs require us to have the same class of share as the founders, which actually makes us more aligned with the founders than you are. Because if you go in with an SPV with a 1x liquidation preference, you're actually in a much better position than we are with the being with the founders. The disadvantage for us, of course, is if a company closes because it needs to with some cash in the bank, we don't get our money back. The founders get quite a lot of money.
Did you have a liquidation preference in the last exit?
I did, as it turns out, because they'd been going for so long. It was C-level liquidation preference. In fact, I did get to one which I discussed yesterday because it was a university spin-out. They raised $75 million, and I went in the G-level preferences and still lost all my money. But you can't have liquidation preferences in the UK if you want the tax reliefs. The whole point about the tax reliefs is they're replacing a preference.
So besides Investor and Investor, you've also written 2 more books, if I understand correctly?
I've written a book called Founder to Founder, which was on that first slide. This was aimed at angel investors. It's mostly read by entrepreneurs wanting to understand how to raise finance from us, how to work with us, how difficult we might be behaving, and how to get the most from us. So I think of the probably 3,000 books we've sold, plus however many Kindles, there's probably 1,000 angels have read them and 2,000 entrepreneurs. The Founder to Founder has been less successful, probably 600, 700, 800. That book was written basically by founders for other founders. But we facilitated it, of course, which was to interview. I've done, attached to this project, there are 83 podcasts of entrepreneurs, investors, and all kinds of other people. There's some really great ones in there. Andy Phillips, if you listen to any of them, Andy Phillips, he's a close friend. We relate really well. It comes across very well. He was a guy that set up a company called Active Hotels, you've never heard of, that became Booking.com, which you have heard of. And obviously, he made quite a lot of money out of that, and then he made quite a lot of money about it. So he's had a great entrepreneurial journey, and he's had a great angel investment journey. And he's so humble. We fight over our humility. You can do that.
Tell us about the new book.
And the new one's totally different. There will be a link to it at the end of the next slide deck. This is quite personal. And it's, as it says on my, wherever it's gone, my fleece, it's called Public Success. Yeah, I don't use it on, but it's called Public Success, Private Grief. And those who've looked at me and somebody I was talking to earlier on know that I've got late-stage cancer. I've been treated with a targeted therapy, which is a tablet which I take every day. It's working really well at the moment. Most of the time, that's not good news, but I'm actually taking that relatively well compared with some of the other tragedies in my life. My son, who was up there before, was on the board of HeBAN, and he took his own life about a year ago. So I've been through that, and he was my co-founder on this, and I've been through a number of other quite difficult tragedies over the last, I'm 68 years old now. So what I'm putting together is a book which I've written about 55,000 words, which showing we all have grief in our lives. There's no doubt we all have something. You know, we've parents who die, grandparents who die. Somebody in this room might have lost a child, I don't know. So we have diseases, we have, a lot of difficult things happen. I seem to have had more than my fair share of them, but at the same time I seem somehow, and who was I talking about, post-traumatic growth? It's rare that I've met anybody who understands the term post-traumatic growth, and you're nodding as well. I only learnt about it a few weeks ago. So this is the concept of having a trauma, and from that, personally developing. And it's clear that I'm not just resilient, I actually have grown from this. And I'm trying to get across in an inspirational way that despite all the various challenges I've had in life, I've actually continued to grow personally and
giving back through that.
Exactly, just what I was saying. And giving back, exactly, in all kinds of ways that we haven't touched on at all this evening.
Amazing. Panos, do you think we should, yeah.
I have one question. So you have made 40 investments or something like that. So how many?
75.
Okay, some statistics about your investments. How about the no's? How many did you meet? How many did you negotiate with? And you said no, stage, how much time did you spend with them?
Yeah, right.
How many meals?
Yeah, this will make me seem rather lucky, more than lucky. At the peak of I built a brand, not really on purpose, but I ended up building a brand. I was made Angel of the Year, and I've had UK Angel Exit of the Year, the European Exit of the Year in Cork last year. So I built a brand sort of by mistake, really. And of course, people know me through the book. So at one point, I was getting in about 1,500 business plans a year. Now, will that be wonderful?
That's as much as a VC gets.
Exactly, it was, exactly, yeah. And the VC says they look at about what they invest in, perhaps 1% a year. I was only investing in 0.5% a year. So I was investing in 6 or 7 out of 1,500. Now, I tried to stem the flow of that by putting my criteria on the website. If you look at the website, which some of you have, there's a lot of data about my criteria, about my investments, about my exits, about my failures, which we'll come to later, and about my statistics. I'm probably the most transparent angel you'll ever meet, I suspect. So despite these criteria, they're still poured in. So how much time? So some are easy. I mean, I remember, this reflects slightly on your country, unfortunately, but I remember actually it was Northern Cyprus, a Northern Cypriot used car dealer contacted me for finance. I don't even bother to say thank you very much then. It's just delete. But it still needs sorting out. So let's reduce that 1,500 down to perhaps 50. So of the 6 or 7, I'll have had more contact with 50 in some way or other. And some of these will be because they come through an angel group and somebody else has picked it up, and I've thought, I'll look at that, so I won't have spent much time on it. But if you look at the ones that I've spent a lot of time on, I've deal-led probably nearly 10 times where it's failed during the process. So I will have spent many, many hours on those until it failed. And although I haven't got a slide on that, I've got lots of anecdotes about why those failed. So the 6 or 7, let's say 20 hours each, that's 120 to 140 hours. I've probably spent about another 300 hours a year turning stuff down. And then on top of that, I've done a few other things as well, of course. So it's probably about 2 to 1 between wasted time, inverted commas, but of course it's not wasted time because you're always learning. You're learning about new tech, you're learning about people, you're learning about business models, etc.
Okay, so with the ones that you decided to somehow engage, at which stage you say no? Could be
Yeah, exactly.
No, I don't like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, hugely. I mean, I remember there's one time, I had a bit of an argument to somebody about this. I got to the point where I'd liked the idea. I wasn't quite so sure about the team. And in the end, the team matters. And so I took it a bit further, and I contacted the person who'd contacted me and said, you claim to be a founder of this team, but you got your shares 6 years after the company was formed. How does that make you a founder? And he wrote back rather rudely, saying, why are you digging into my background like that? That's unfair. Delete. So, of course, like any piece of string, the length varies. So I did a study, actually, for the European Union on analysing some business plans, and which was recorded and is probably somewhere in an archive somewhere in Brussels at the moment. And in each case, I think, there might have been several of them, I'd made a decision about whether to invest or not before I knew what the idea was. So I'd actually looked at the team and made a decision based on the team before I decided whether, not all of them, of course. In some of them, I looked at the team and thought, good, let's go on further, but it's the team. And if you read in the book, I very specifically say, pitch deck is header slide, team slide. And then I don't need to go any further if I don't like that team. So I can weed out a team, I can weed out something rapidly. Now, this takes time and experience, and it's all very well saying it, but somebody's only just started investing. Oh, how do you work that out? Read the book.
Do you have any help? Do you use a VA?
Use a VA?
A virtual assistant? Or a personal assistant, a PA?
That's complicated, actually, because what I did soon after I started angel investing, I helped set up a VC, a corporate VC within an engineering company in Cambridge. And I was doing all the work myself. And then a friend of my second wife's eldest child knocked on the door with a very poor CV and said, look, I want to get you investment. And he's now one of the best investors in Cambridge. He's 36 now, and so over the last 10 years, he's followed and shadowed me. And he's done that by soaking up information. So he's worked with me initially for free for a couple of years, and then he still lives at home with his parents at 36. Even though he has a house in Cambridge worth £600,000.
He needs the money to invest into angels.
He's never invested
into startups, yeah.
So yes, in that respect, I was lucky to have somebody to act as an apprentice, effectively.
Okay. Got it.
Now, about the boards now.
Oh, okay.
If you can tell us a little bit, what you will advise us? Because in UK, you must, sit on the board. In our case that we don't have
Boards.
boards, what you will advise us and with what equity we can,
Influence.
in a nice way,
Yeah.
talking to the founders, of course, what you will tell us.
So let's just check. So the corporate structure in Greece, is there not a supervisory structure built into company law or not?
In the company structure that is usually used for startups, which is IKE, the definition of a board, I think is, I don't know if it even exists in an IKE.
No, we can.
Yeah, so the most popular, company form does not have the definition of a board.
And at what point, after IKE, when it gets bigger, what's it called then?
It's Société Anonyme,
SA. And at what point do IKEs become SAs? Do they ever?
I don't know.
In my view at the moment, the only difference is the capital required.
Yeah.
Because, again, for a Société Anonyme, it's only 25,000 euros.
For SA?
Yeah.
I really don't understand why people...
Do a IKE instead of an SA. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, let's explore
The
that.
board is a difference also,
Yeah,
right?
And Société Anonymes can raise
Yeah.
bonds, like bond debt.
Yeah.
But they might need a minimum of 25,000 of capital, do they?
Yeah.
But
The
you're
SAs.
all putting in more than 25.
Yeah, of course.
So why aren't you using SAs? Why aren't you
I think
forcing-
also the accounting requirements are a little bit the same, huh? Okay.
So that must be the answer to your question. Can you get to the point to force them
Push
into
them to
being
SA.
an SA?
There-
Exactly.
My first exit, they had to convert to an SA in order to sell themselves to the Greek public energy company.
Yeah.
And it was a process that took a long time to convert. It would have been much easier to just initially launch as an SA.
Exactly. So if you were to get to the point where you invest in SAs and there is a board structure, then I very strongly recommend that the investor group takes a board position.
Because we had one case, if you remember, guys, that's why I raised for one company, and because you remember the debate that we had, I don't want to name the company now, and we said we should next time think about this. That's why I'm raising this, so we can learn from each other. We can talk individually which one actually we talk about. So that's one thing. And regarding the investor relationships, usually we have here a debate. For example, should we ask them every 3 months, every 2 months? Usually we have the model that we have a lead investor, let's say, for example, and then the rest of us will invest. We don't want to create a noise, so the lead investor talks more regularly to them.
Yeah.
And the rest of us, we get, an investor's, report. In a case they need us for something, or because of our expertise, we can step. Now, how often you think we should ask an investor, report, and what it should be there?
Yeah, okay. Again, in the book.
I read that.
Yeah, so I would like to go back to that second half of your previous question first, though, which is what influence? Because in the contract, so you go through a process, you invest, and you have a contractual commitment, which is the shareholder agreement or something like that. Is that what it's called? In there can be things which, although you hope never to pull this thing out of the drawer until it exits, you can refer back to it. So this is the level of influence stroke control. In the UK, it's normal that the shareholder base has rights. I'm sure that's the same here. So drag along, tag along are the two terms we have, which is to do with exit. And secondly, the investor director, the one that with the SA you might have, has a set of more granular rights. Things like the company can't pay more than a certain amount of money to anybody without investor director approval. Things like they can't go into debt without investor approval, investor director approval, etc. And there's a list of about 12 of those, and I can send you a copy, of my term sheet, which has got all the things that you could talk about. So this is where, because when you get to a board and you're on the board as an SA, there'll be times when things aren't going so well. There's sure to be, where you're helping them. You do need some sort of level of, even if you do it in a very kind way and say, look, we have agreed that, in these circumstances, I have the right to say yes or no. You don't want to break down the relationship, because if you start breaking down the relationship at board level, things won't look very good at all. So I'll send you that and you can share that around. Just briefly to answer your other question, my view, and it's really difficult even if I'm on the board to enforce this, is that they should report every 3 months. Not every month, that's too often. It comes into your inbox, you don't bother to read it. Every 3 months, that should say something. They still tend to not want to do that because they're saying, oh, we're just going to go win that new order, or we're just about to go out for new funding, or whatever. So this 3 months drags out. But unless they communicate well, it's going to be very difficult for you to invest in the next round. I also believe strongly, although again it doesn't happen that much, in the UK we used to have the concept of an annual general meeting, which I'm sure your quoted companies do, but we used to have that for unquoted companies. That's gone now. So I do suggest that they have a get-together of the shareholders once a year, so you can meet in the same room, even if it's a Zoom room. And just
Yeah, definitely.
One huge difference is English or common law versus Greek law.
Yeah.
Whereas in Greek law, you can write whatever you want, but you cannot enforce anything. So this is...
What? That's in the shareholder agreement. It's not enforceable.
Well, meaning that the law has precedence over whatever agreement you do privately. Okay.
But then we can discuss this and without forcing, the founders to say once a year, because we need to be trained ourselves and we have to train our next investment, and we should have some rules. For example, the investor, on the board, okay, we give, 100 and VC comes and gives 450, maybe we cannot claim, a board. That's okay. But at least we should have some criteria among us in order to be shared among the HeBAN members. And if we think it's okay, one does not fit all, but at least we have some basic things that, for example, like this one, because something else that we try in the past, the ones that we invest in, to bring all the founders together once and start, to get to know each other, because that will be good also for them.
Exactly.
Because they are on different states, and then they maybe say, okay, how have you done that? Or someone wants to enter Germany, and then that guy that we have is on Germany. So this is what we should try, to do it as a pilot. That's why I'm raising this. We had to mature enough to do this, because a few years ago we were not in existence. And so that's why I'm asking this question. Of course, we will take it away.
Do I have time for one more question for Peter?
You are, yes.
Okay, great. So here's a hot one.
Yeah.
Before we continue, a very small
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're on the board, it's absolutely free of charge.
Good question, and that's been talked about many times. My experience and my way of advising people is that it shouldn't be free of charge, because you're committing time, you're committing responsibility. You're also representing a whole load of investors behind you who are doing nothing. So you should in some way be compensated. And the compensation, in my view, should be risk-aligned to start with and then fees. So you should take you have the concept of options here. So an option is a way of motivating and staff or...
As in stock options?
Stock options.
Yeah,
exactly.
sure.
So you should be given some stock options as a member of the board, which are the equivalent of about 2% of the company at the point of investment, or 3% over the 3 years. So let's say 1%. So say you have a post-money valuation. So it's a pre-money of 500, you put 200 in, that's 700. You should get 1% of that, the equivalent, 7,000 euros per year for your presence on the board. With risk, though. If the company fails, you'll never get that money. But of course, if the company sells for 10 times, that's 7,000. If there was no more further investment, 70,000 euros a year. That's pretty good. I mean, I was on the board of a company that exited, and I got paid for my 10 years on the board, which would have been the equivalent of perhaps 6 weeks' work. I got paid £400,000. Yeah, that's 500,000 euros. It was all at risk. I put a lot of time into it, I enjoyed it a lot. I got a lot from it, but I also got £500,000, which is quite a lot of money.
From the start or somewhere along?
Yeah, that's from the start. But at some point, I think it should swap to fees. And the reason for doing that is that options dilute everybody. You're diluting the founders, you're diluting the other investors. I think at the point where the company has raised either enough money, as in probably 2 or 3 million euros, or has got to a level of profitability or, got the customer income, you should swap to fees. And then the amount of fees obviously depends on the country. In the UK, it's usually a minimum of £1,000 a month and a maximum of £2,000 a month. So yes, totally agree. You should be compensated for your time.
So this actually brings to the hot question I was ready to ask. So in Greece, we don't have, most of the investments we're doing as HeBAN, the startups don't have boards. They don't have board of directors. So we don't have someone to appoint and to get these options.
Sure.
So let's say there's a lead investor. He spends a lot of time and money time mainly, and opportunity lost, to find the founders, to talk with them, to set up the deal, to get everyone aligned. And he gathers another 10 people and they do the investment. Does the lead investor, should he get something extra? Yes or no?
Well, if there's an SPV and you can set it up with a carry, they will get something. You allocate 10% of the profit or something to them, so they will get something for their time, but that's risk-based. If they join the board, they're getting fund, it's obviously risk-based. And that's, in the Cambridge Angels, that's what we do. We enjoy the process, although at risk of leading a deal. It's hard work, and people are slow to respond, and sometimes it fails. But we then get the opportunity and the privilege of joining the board. And that's the
What if there's no board, like in Greece?
Yeah, that's a really difficult
Should he get
problem.
an extra percentage or better valuation?
Yes. So sometimes, and I've done this a few times, we actually, I don't know if you can do it in Greece, we have 2 rounds happening one day after the next. So the deal lead will buy shares at a cheaper valuation. The share price will be 80 cents rather than €1. So you're compensating by giving them more shares for their money.
Okay, so it's valid and it's okay to do that.
Exactly.
In your opinion.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. One more question.
Yes. We're living in a century with many disasters. So, with your experience, would you like to give us some ideas about the challenges, next challenges and next risks? Thanks.
Oh, in terms of startups or in terms of
Humanity.
climate change and AI, and are you looking at a big philosophical picture there? Oh my God. That's a difficult one.
AI will kill us all.
AI, I was talking to Andreas about this yesterday. Universal basic income might be necessary. The human race has coped with quite strong technological change with the Industrial Revolution and not actually ended up with lots of people out of work. That may be the case with AI, but AI is coming up on us really rapidly. And by AI, I don't just mean software AI, I mean robotic AI as well. This is both software replacing accountants and lawyers and call center workers and everybody else, and salespeople possibly, programmers even. And you've got the robots, which are going to replace a lot of the mechanical work. Yeah, this is a huge issue. It's well beyond my pay grade to
predict.
Really, exactly, to predict, exactly. So, you saw what happened with OpenAI in the last few days. I mean, what the fuck was going on there?
Aaron Sorkin is on the script right now.
Yes.
For the new movie.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Climate change, I'm definitely of the opinion that we could destroy the globe if we don't do something, and we are doing something, but the something isn't being done fast enough. I shouldn't be here, should I? I've just created some carbon flying from London to here, haven't I? I mean, at what point do we change our behavior in order to save the planet? It's really tough, that one, and I don't know. But then on top of that, you've got, human nature and aggression, and the 2 big wars not very far. The one down the road here is only 500 kilometers away, isn't it? And then the one up there in Ukraine is only 500 kilometers away as well. I don't know. You know, I was talking to Andreas about this. My children, or child now, have got friends who won't have children because they're worried about the future.
My study, I'm an agriculturalist. So I think the bigger problem now is the climate change.
Is
Climate change.
climate change? Yeah.
It's very difficult.
And there's a lot of technology going into that, pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and reducing it. But are we going to be doing it fast enough? I just don't know.
So, thank you very much, Peter.
You-